Welcome in to Words with Wallace. I'm your host, Nick Wallace, coming at you. It is Tuesday, May 30th. We are about 24 hours out from the Celtics coming up short in Game 7 against the Miami Heat. If you somehow were in a coma and missed what had happened the past couple games with the Celtics, clawed all their way back down from 0-3 to force a Game 7 just to come up short. We're joined by our guy, RJ Rosazza, to recap what we saw last night in Game 7 and kind of evaluate the Celtics season as a whole. RJ, how you hanging in there today, bud?
So again, you have me on after a loss, and I've been trying to be a more positive fan, but you're clearly enabling me at this point. But no, it's just the biggest when it comes to sports, maybe the biggest blue balls I've ever had as a fan ever. For all those 3 wins, to fight your way back, claw your way back, just shit your pants on home court, just absolutely choke the game away and play from pretty much behind the entire game and just never seemed like they were really in the game at all.
Yeah, that was the frustrating thing, man. Like, you would think, I was talking to my parents about this. I was like, you'd think I'd be like yelling at my screen and really active and engaged during the game. But like, frankly, there was only a handful of times where I even got that pissed off because I mean, probably right around turnover 5 for Jaylen Brown is when I like first lost it. But like beyond that, like it wasn't even close enough for me to be that locked in for it. It just kind of, just to kind of, I'll quickly recap, a couple things that happened in the game that set the tone because I feel like it's worth mentioning. Not making an excuse for this team by any means, but it is worth noting that literally the first possession of the game, the Garden's alive, the crowd looked like it was fantastic, and then possession 1, Tatum goes to the basket, takes it baseline, looks like he comes down on somebody's foot and sprains his ankle in a pretty significant way. He got sent to the free throw line after that, but clearly he was shaken up and it affected him the rest of the way. He looked pretty passive on offense the rest of the game. Defensively, he was obviously a shell of himself as well. And we just got off to a really miserable start shooting the ball as well that we can touch upon. And then we, of course, had a nightmare game from our co-star Jaylen Brown as well. So the Celtics ended up losing by, I think, 20 points. I think they finished with, 84 points, right? I believe that was the lowest total that they put up literally the entire season, which tells you everything you need to know of how much it was a struggle. But what was your, watching that game in totality, what was the biggest thing that jumped out to you about that game?
So going in, I think if you look at, I think this 7-game series really almost summed up their season as a whole. As the first 3 games, you had the Celtics team that we've talked about when I've been on here before that were fearful. Like, is this who this team is? Like, is this what they're going to play? And we saw it a little bit in the Atlanta series, a little bit in the Philly series. Then games 4 through 6, we saw the team that we knew they could be if they played up to their potential. And then it came down to game 7. Who are they? Are they the team from games 1 through 3, or are they the team from games 4 through 6? And clearly, they were the team from games 1 through 3. I think this is what this team is. I think they choked. And to do that in front of your own home court, when literally the entire, like, I don't know if you saw it in front of the TD Garden before the game, but they had that place mobbed. The fans are ready to go, and you came out flat from the start, gave them nothing to cheer about. And this one's going to sting for them for a long time, especially for Jaylen Brown.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, and I don't mean to, obviously, credit goes to Miami for going out and winning that game as an 8 seed. They have a pretty unbelievable story, but we are going to preview the NBA Finals a little bit toward the end of this podcast, so we'll talk more about the Heat then. So we are just obviously focusing on the Celtics season, but I think you covered it, man. And I do want to touch upon this because, again, I obviously mentioned the Tatum ankle injury. I don't know about you, but you mentioned that you had kind of heard about the injury. You missed that play and then kind of had to watch it back, but when I saw that play, I would love to tell you that I still had confidence that we were going to rally and find a way to win the game. But I didn't really feel like that because we haven't been a mentally tough team all season. And unfortunately, it's a luxury that we do have 2 All-NBA players, of something I've been very proud of as a Celtics fan this season. But unfortunately, it just kind of feels like even in games where Tatum has struggled or, been in foul trouble or what have you, we never really had that step up from Jaylen Brown for him to, become more of the primary shot maker, if you will. He was certainly a shot taker last night. But it is worth noting that I think that injury totally sucked the wind out of the building. It seemed like the crowd, was significantly less involved from that point on, which was obviously very early on in the game. But the Celtics did it to themselves, right? I don't want to make an excuse. I do think the game would have gone differently if our best player didn't get hurt on literally the first possession. But the Celtics did that to themselves. You lose any margin of error when you fall down 0-3 to a team that is inferior talent-wise. I can't sit up here and make the injury excuse and cry about it, because that's the type of variability that happens in a 7-game series when you let it go 7 games. Like, I'd love to, again, I don't think the Heat sustained an injury as significant as Tatum by any means, but, they lost Gabe Vincent for a game, who was, at times their second or third best offensive player. They've been without Tyler Herro since literally the first game of the playoffs. So it's difficult to make that excuse, but I do think it's worth noting, and I don't know if you had any comments on Tatum's play.
Yeah, I don't know how you felt going into the game, but I don't know if you saw any of the video going around after Game 6. They seemed, after they pulled off obviously crazy Derek White game-winning shot, they seemed very relieved in the locker room to be going home, almost like they're like, we got this now. We're at home. And they thought last night they could just roll the ball out there like they've done a lot of times this year, and that the game was just going to come to them, that the win was going to come to them, and it didn't come to them. And then you have, like you said, Tatum goes down early. Your shots aren't falling. You would think you would be like, hey, we need to just attack the basket and get the ball to go into the hoop a few times to build our confidence. But they just completely kept hucking up shots, and they just dug themselves into a bigger and bigger hole, and they just hung around that gap of, 12 to 15 points for too long, where then you get deeper into the game, and they never really got it close where I felt comfortable.
Yeah.
It was never really felt like it got within, maybe got within 5 or 6 once. Yeah, I could be a little off, but I never felt comfortable, because I knew if the Heat go on one run here in the second half, and they went on it, and then you're done. That's why you can't hang like that.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth mentioning too that I think you're right. I think it was 6 or 7 points was the number where we cut it to a handful of times throughout the game, especially in the third quarter. I think we that's probably was our best stretch of basketball when Derek White was really cooking for us. He seemed like the lone bright spot of the team, but when you look at the box score, he was only 5 and 12.
He's the only guy that realized, my shot's not falling. Why don't I attack the hoop?
Yeah.
And he was probably the only guy in the entire team that maybe ever got a fan off his seat. He went on a good run there where he had a couple and ones, hit a couple threes. Yep, and he almost clawed them back into the game. But I'm sure we're gonna get Martin in a little bit. Every time that they had a chance, where every time the Celtics needed him to miss a shot, he made it.
Yep.
And sometimes that's all you need is a run killer on your team, especially if you get up like that.
Yeah, and it's you look at the box score, he had 26 points, but I cannot overstate that if you watch that game, every single time, I'm willing to bet every single time it did get cut down to 6 points, 7 points, even single-digit lead for the Heat, Martin was the next person to score. And it's unbelievable on a team with Jimmy Butler, who is obviously the leader of that team and whatnot. For Martin to step up like that, it was and he's been great for them all series. A lot of people felt like he should have got the award for best player on the Eastern Conference champion, and that ended up going to Jimmy, which I mostly agreed with. But whatever, he really was that good to be in the conversation. But I'm glad we touched upon White too, because I felt like he was awesome. And then of course, I think he ended up pulling a hamstring or something like that, because he actually
they didn't even really I could be wrong, but I didn't even hear them acknowledge it on the broadcast for a while. So I was wondering where he went, because I'm like, Hauser, I think they put Hauser in for him. And then I think I was scrolling through Twitter and I saw that he went to the locker room, and maybe they did mention it on TNT, but I didn't catch it.
I think the best point you made was, White was the guy that wasn't settling, right? He seemed to, in that third quarter where he had a really nice stretch of offense where he was consistently penetrating into the Miami zone, it looked like he was living at the foul line area. He got a couple tough floaters to go. Like you said, I think he got an and one in that stretch. But really it was because, we got ourselves in a hole early, because I think we missed I think the stat was we missed our first 12 threes of the game.
Yeah, it was 0 for 11 or 0 for 12 to start.
Yeah, and it was floating around. People were already making that, what was it, the 2017 Rockets or something like that team in Game 7 that missed 27 consecutive threes, where just like the Celtics, their whole philosophy was take as many threes as possible. So yeah, man, I will give credit too. I think Miami did a pretty good job for the most part of, at least, a lot of them, they just didn't fall for us, but a lot of other ones were rushed. I remember specifically Brogdon checking into the game, and I'm like, all right, hey, Brogdon's back. It's good. He obviously missed Game 6. Immediately throws up an air ball that was obviously not even remotely close. And I do give him some, at least he has an excuse with his forearm injury on his shooting arm. I'm sure that affected how that shot was going up. And then Al in the corner looked like he's a great 3-point shooter. He was pretty sure he was second in the NBA during the regular season. And then, his first 3-pointer, or one of his first ones, was in the corner, and he airballed it. He looked so rushed, even though he's a good shooter. He doesn't have a quick release. So yeah, man. I mean, I felt like that really killed us. But when you just to kind of zoom out a little bit, when you are going to think back about this series in like 5 years or something like that, how are you gonna think about it? Are you gonna think of it as like the Celtics clawing their way back just to blow it? Are you just gonna are we thinking this is just gonna be a part of the Heat's 30 for 30 doc if they somehow go on and win the championship as an 8 seed? How do you think you're gonna remember this series as a Celtics fan?
I think Game 7 is going to be really resident with me because there's a lot of teams in that situation in Game 7 after you've blown a 3-0 lead that would just fold under pressure. And I think it really showed how good of a coach Spoelstra is and how good of a leader Butler is that they were able to just, hey, it's a one-game series now. They forgot everything that happened in the past. Sorry, I think if the Celtics were a team that blew a 3-0 lead, they would fold in a Game 7. It takes a special team to realize that this is it. Like, it doesn't matter what happened before. But yeah, I'll just think, like, what if? Like, if they could have just played even a little bit better of basketball in those first 3 games and just could have defended home court better. Like, how do you just, in front of your own fans, like, in the NBA, so many teams are comfortable playing at home in all postseason. The Celtics are what happened all season finally came back and it bit them in the ass. And that I was wondering if that was going to happen eventually, and it did.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point too, right? Like, last night we said it was frustrating, but I feel like we knew at midway through the fourth quarter the game was already over. There was a pretty, intense feeling of doom right from the start with Tatum's ankle injury that I touched upon. But that almost wasn't even our game to win, right? Like I mentioned this in the last podcast where I was like, hey, if we end up dropping this series to Miami, we're going to be haunted by games 1 and 2 because this isn't Philadelphia anymore, right? This isn't, when we lost game 1 in Philly on some bullshit because Harden went crazy, and then we lost game 5, because we doubled Embiid and then Harden hit a big 3 in the corner. Like, those were coin flip games, but we were able to drop 2 of the coin flip games and still win the series. With Miami, with how tough they are and how well coached they are, they don't give you those opportunities because games 1 and 2, those were coin flip games that were at home, right? You have to at least win one of those things, right? We have a miserable third quarter in game 1, and then in game 2, it's a game of runs the entire time, and Miami just got the last punch in, and we kind of went MIA down the stretch, executing our offense. Game 3 was an ass whooping for Miami. Games 4 and 5 were ass whoopings in our favor. And so, you kind of look at that in totality and you realize that Miami won, the 2 coin flip games that they had to, and we only got one of them in game 6. And that's kind of how it comes down, in my opinion. I feel like you're absolutely right. I think we lost that series early on, obviously.
It stings, too, knowing, they didn't have Hero. Outside of the first couple of games, Bam Adebayo really wasn't that effective. He went on little, runs there. I think in game 6 or game 5, he went on a little run where he scored like 10 straight for them. But I mean, Butler was good, but he wasn't great. He had a few games in there where he wasn't super effective. It just felt like we let these not no names, because if you follow the league, you know the guys, but these guys that are either undrafted or late draft picks beat you.
Yeah.
And then you had your own superstars that really were just way too inconsistent. And not to circle back to Brown too much, but it just felt like he was a guy that, like, the way he was dribbling the basketball, like, and I get that people have been critical of his dribble before, but that was like a guy that's just in his own head, nervous, and he's just not thinking. He gets the ball, do I shoot, do I pass? And before you know it, he dribbles the ball half an inch further than he wanted to, or Butler comes from behind and pokes it. Like, that was an all-time Game 7 choke job of a guy. That's the thing, like, I want to kill him, and I do. Like, he deserves a big part of the loss, but you almost feel for a guy on that stage. It's one thing to lose and you're missing your shot, but to turn the ball over, and when it's that evident you couldn't handle the moment, like I said, there's one thing to miss a bunch of shots. There's another when you clearly cannot handle the moment and you're turning the ball over 8 times. I think at one point he turned the ball over more than the entire Heat team had in the fourth quarter. I don't know how it ended up at the end, but...
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I was definitely saving the Jaylen Brown stuff, but I'd love to get into that now because we obviously have the front office of the Celtics rather has a huge decision to make in terms of his contract and the Supermax he's eligible for. But you're absolutely right, man. I think just as much as this was, the Caleb Martin game for Miami and how clutch he was for them every time they needed him, it was the Jaylen Brown nightmare game, I think, was unfortunately the story of the Celtics. And like you, I was pretty frustrated with Jaylen throughout the series. He obviously had a pretty tough stretch even before this game. And I was really, really pissed at him during the first, half of the game. Even, at the start of the third quarter, I was like, man, I'm so done with this guy. And then I just started to feel bad because it just kept happening. And the thing that's frustrated, just for reference, so we can illustrate how poor he was, finished 8 of 23 shooting. He was 1 of 9 from 3, and he finished the game with 8 turnovers. When they announced on the broadcast that it got up to 8, I was like, good God. And you're right. It's the frustrating thing, too, is if you followed this team last season, the biggest gripe about Jaylen Brown, the biggest gripe about him, throughout most of his career at this point has just been ball security, right? Like, a lot of people make the joke that he is easily the best player in the NBA that can't dribble the ball. Like, he really can't. And it's really horrible matchups for him. Like, I can't even think of how many times in the finals that, like, Draymond specifically was like a shark that smelt blood when Jaylen Brown would put the ball on the ground in front of him. That's what the Miami zone defense was. Like, everybody's doing like the reach around tap thing just to try to get at him. And yeah, man, it was a nightmare game. And so let's just jump into that now. Obviously he made second team All NBA. We talked about that, and he has the opportunity to now be eligible for a Supermax contract. What is your gut reaction? Obviously, we're only 24 hours out from Game 7, but, how are you feeling about the Jaylen Brown contract decision right now?
So I've actually gone back and forth on it all day because, you don't want to be a victim of the moment because it's been 24 hours. And right now at this moment, I lean maybe try to move him, but I'm not going into the offseason with my objective to be to trade him because I feel like if you go and do that, you're going to do a bad trade or you're going to force your hand and do something that's not going to end well. So I would go in with an open mind into the offseason, and if a Damian Lillard becomes available or somebody like that, and maybe you get a trade offer to you, I would be open-minded about it, but I would tread very lightly because, it's about not being, trying to go out of your comfortability zone, making a deal like this. It comes with some risk. If they go and trade him and that trade doesn't work out, who's to say down the road in a couple of years Tatum doesn't get pissed off because he doesn't trust the front office to put the right guys around him? It's not just, I know I see a lot of fans that are just like, yep, trade him, we're done with him. I'm not there yet, but I would be open-minded to dealing him.
Yeah, and it is crazy. Like, I'm the same way, where he would need this. I couldn't imagine a much worse Jaylen Brown series than kind of what we got, especially the way it was capped off with Game 7 last night. Like, I really didn't think I'd be in this situation where I'd have any doubts. Again, I'm still definitely leaning on the side of offering the contract, the max contract that is. And I should preface this by saying, look, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in this, but I'm pretty sure I'm buttoned up on his contract situation here. He is under contract as of right now through the end of next season. So obviously, if nothing happens, he would be an unrestricted free agent at this time next year, right? So the way I look at it, and again, he's eligible for this Supermax extension. If I'm Jaylen Brown and I'm Jaylen Brown's agent, I can't imagine you're taking a discount. You're either like, you're offering me the Supermax or you can F off. Like, I think that's how it's going to go down. So the way I see it is like, if contract negotiations get ugly, everyone's going to know about it. Like, they just lost in a pretty embarrassing way in the Eastern Conference Finals. Like, and they're a huge market team. People love talking about the C's. I feel like it's going to get out pretty quick if those contract negotiations aren't progressing. And there really isn't a negotiation, right? It's either they're offering the max or they're not. So,
and it just seems like that whole Brown, not to cut you off, that whole Brown
good.
situation has been very eerie. Like the Durant rumors, and then he's calling out the city, making comments. I'm not going to get into the whole race thing, but kind of throwing that out there a little bit, playing around with that. And then you have him calling out the fan base before Game 7 against Philadelphia, which I absolutely hated because, dude, if you're going to go do that, maybe show up in Game 7, don't come out slow the way you did. I just wonder if everything is leading to an end here where, we know Boston can be a very toxic city. I wonder if he's already starting to like feel those rumblings and hear those noises, if he's gonna crack because of what just happened, because the fans aren't gonna be easy on him.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought we got relief from this, situation that I think was progressively getting a bit uglier throughout the year, and I did think the Philly comments were a little weird with him calling out the crowd and whatnot. It's like, hey, maybe you're going to blame the crowd for being let under 500 at home in the playoffs. Like, is it really the crowd's fault? Like, I think by all accounts we have at least a good crowd. But either way, kind of back to what I was saying about the negotiations, I just feel like, if word gets out that the negotiations aren't progressing, his value is just going to be tanking, right? The last thing I want to happen is if we somehow can't come to an agreement in the offseason, Like, we have to move him this offseason. We can't let it get to the trade deadline because then we're just going to be desperate, right? Like, because as we all know, the only time that trades are made in the NBA are in the offseason and at the trade deadline. There's very rare instances where that shit happens any other time of the year in between those two landmarks, right? So again, I think at this point I would say sign him. I would say just offer him the contract, and again, I would be more open. Like, I don't know how likely it is if we do offer him the contract that we're able to still move him. Like, I still think there are teams out there that'd be fine with him being on a max contract, because I do think he is a max contract player. Is he a super max? Well, I don't know, but either way, I think you're just it's not worth the risk to kind of play around with it, right? You don't want to totally piss the guy off and have him be like the get me out of here thing, because the Stars have all the leverage. You don't want to let it get into the offseason or into the trade deadline without having a deal on paper. And the number one thing you can't afford to do is end up into a situation where you're trading him for 50 cents on the dollar or he hits free agency. So I'm leaning towards signing him, but I obviously have reservations that I never had about this, because I don't know what the ceiling of this team is if we have both those guys making max contracts.
Yeah, and like honestly, if you like 2 hours before the game, if you ask me what I'm doing with Brown in the offseason, I'm saying give him the super max. And like I said, try not to be a victim of the moment. And it's not really it's tough for me to like, kill the coach and say we need a new coach and then be like, oh, well, let's get rid of Brown too, because maybe we just do need a new coach and you can still kind of go into next season with the same mix. I don't know, but like I said, they need to tread lightly with him, because the worst thing they could do is move on from him and then get into a bad spot with Tatum and then leave yourself at the altar with neither of them in no rings.
Yeah. And again, I do think it's like, obviously it's hard to remove the recency bias, but we have a reason to be upset. And I think part of the reason we have a reason to be upset and frustrated with Jaylen Brown is that, he's making all this. These are the same mistakes that he's made before. If he had just like this one-off series where it's like, man, he had, he was playing against the best defense in the league. He couldn't figure out the zone. Like, his ball security was bad. Like, all those things are true, but like, it came out of left field. No, that really wasn't the case. This has been very well documented. It was noticed on a national stage during the playoff run last year, his lack of ball handling, his issues with ball security. And we know that, like, look, Jaylen Brown is an incredible player in the regular season, and we are an incredible regular season team. But we have graduated from that level with being happy with regular season success. We've been to the playoffs for, 8 or 9 straight years. It's kind of unbelievable. Like, we're obviously spoiled in that regard. But it's also reasonable for us, if we have a top 10 player in the NBA and another guy that's in the top 25 realm, that we should be expecting, the goal should be a championship. And if there are real reservations, like, hey, if Tatum, sprains his ankle and he's 50%, we need a guy at the, he doesn't necessarily have to score 40 points, but he can't crumble in a situation like that. Like, I still think long term that the fit is good, but let's get into the ceiling of the team situation. I don't know if we're going to end up having a better core around these two guys than what we had this year. And it's only going to get harder from here if we do sign Jaylen Brown to surround Tatum and Brown with the right pieces. It's going to be hard to get a situation that was better than this year. And I'm interested to see if you agree or disagree with that.
Yeah, because they're talking, I think there was something new with the CBA with potentially the money, like they might have to get rid of Brogdon or one of these guys for, cents on the dollar. That's why I don't know if I want to get rid of Brown. Like, can they put this team back together with the right coach at the helm and go on a run next year? But I just think this year was the perfect storm. This is a better roster than they had last year. The path was easier, and they just ran into a team that really just like dehumanized them. They just looked like they got deballed by Miami. Like they were like the complete polar opposite. Yeah, that's the exact word I was looking for. Thank you.
Gotcha.
Just a team that like they're like the polar opposite of Miami. Like Miami, they get how to win. They're gritty. They're ready for. Like, how bad were the Celtics all year down the stretch? How many times are we going into the last seconds and the ball's going to end up in Marcus Smart's hands for him to huck up a terrible shot? I've never had more confidence in a team down the stretch than I had with this team this year.
Yeah, and I think we talked about that before too. We have no business with a team that has two, 25-point plus per game scorers on it. That are good in isolation situations, that can exploit smaller mismatches. and some good 3-point shooters surrounding them, that we should have this difficult of a time executing late game situations. It obviously took an incredible bailout from Derek White for us to even be in the situation that we were in Game 6 after we folded a lead. But yeah, I'm with you, man. I think I do want to touch upon the CBA briefly. I'm not going to go into it because I can't pretend that I've read it and understand everything in it. But the SparkNotes version of the CBA agreement is it is going to get more difficult for teams to go into the luxury tax. The penalties for that are harsher. It's basically impossible to have teams like what we had in the past with Golden State that just lived in the luxury tax.
As an example.
Yeah, and so with that, it is possible to pay two guys max money. That is possible. You can definitely do that, but it's really hard to even if you already have those guys under contract, like we obviously have a really good core, it's going to be hard to re-sign a guy like a Grant Williams. It's going to be hard to eventually re-sign a guy like a Malcolm Brogdon or a Derek White around them. So with those penalties surrounding the salary cap being more punitive moving forward, it definitely raises more questions about the Supermax, in addition to the fact that Jaylen Brown just struggled on a really big stage in ways that were similar to his shortcomings in the playoffs last year. So I think that's obviously worth noting. But, just on the ceiling of the team thing, I think you kind of alluded to it. So you would agree that this was our, do you think this was our best chance? Like how, or if it's not, how can we even improve on this team? What would you like to see in the, besides the coaching staff, obviously, which we can talk about a little bit as well?
Well, I sound like a broken record coming on here talking about the big guy depth, but that's one of them. I would like to, but then at the same time, I don't know who's the right guy you're going to go out and get. It's early in the offseason. I haven't done a lot of that research. I mean, they're going to get Gallinari. I don't know how impactful you think he's going to be. I think he could be a scorer off the bench, but I don't know if it can get, because if you just bring Brown and Tatum back, who's to say it's just not going to be the same thing where they're going to have a good regular season and they just I don't even think we're having this conversation. Let's say and I don't even like playing this game talking about injuries, like, oh, what if this guy was healthy? What if this guy was hurt? But let's say that the Bucks had Chris Middleton last year in the playoffs and the Celtics lose in the second round. Are we really even still having this conversation? I think there's more fear. There would be more fear now that they don't get it. They can't win. And because that trip to the finals doesn't happen last year, and we're talking, we need to, change things. So I still have a fear in me that they don't get it. And I think what I hated about this season is I just think they've regressed in who I kind of thought they were. I thought after that deep run last year, they kind of understood how to win. And then they just showed me so many times in this postseason that they just don't get it. And Game 7 was a perfect example of that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too, right? Like, I think it is. I'm with you. I hate playing the what if game. There's so many what ifs. Like the Middleton injury is obviously significant,
like
but
what Tatum's ankle last night. Another
exactly
prime example right there.
You could do that all day long, and you could really piss yourself off about where your team's at. But I get it. I get understanding. Like, hey, what if? I think what you're trying to say is, hey, what if last year was more of the outlier than, and this, what we experienced this season and seasons prior is more of what the norm is, right? Like maybe we didn't actually break through a glass ceiling last year when we made it to the finals, right? But I do think that I would say that we did either way, right? Because by hook or by crook, we got there, right? We got to the finals. We had a 2-1 lead against the Golden State Warriors, and I think we just lost to a better team at that point. But that experience is invaluable. So I do think that the guys understand, how to get there. My fear is just like, man, if we do have Jaylen on this max money, like, the core that we had was special. We had 8 real guys, and obviously it would have been nice to have Gallinari in there too. But like, does he even? We don't even know what we're getting from him. We had guys like Peyton Pritchard that weren't even consistently being in the rotation. Like, I just feel like the role pieces were really perfect. Obviously, the coaching experience is one area where we can improve. So, maybe that is what eventually gets us through that. But let's kind of have that conversation now. I don't want to spend too much time on the coach, but obviously we had some strong things to say about Mazzulla the last time when we were both on. We were able to claw our way back from an 0-3 deficit against Miami. So maybe he saved his job, but how are you feeling about it? What would you do with Joe Mazzulla right now?
First of all, was my biggest fear of the comeback is after Game 3 when he said, I didn't have these guys ready to go, and he pretty much said that the team quit on him. I was like, he's dead in the water. Like I don't care what extension they gave him in the offseason. He's done. Then they go on this little run. I'm like, oh, did this just save this guy's job? I would move on. I get that they went on this little run, but he just seems like he couldn't inspire these guys at all. And, maybe that shouldn't be a knock on him. That should be a knock at these guys in the locker room. But I don't have any confidence with him at the helm going forward. I saw a report today that I guess they're unlikely to move on from him and that they want to gather veteran assistants around him. And that just, again, pisses me off because they're not doing that if they didn't give him the contract extension freaking 4 months ago. And I would love to know whose decision that was, whether it was the owners or whether it was Brad Stevens, because, I mean, there'd be blood to pay if I was the owner and we just gave this guy a 4-year deal who clearly isn't ready to coach yet. Heads would fall.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's tough, man. This is the one that I really don't know about. I think I'm at peace with the Jaylen Brown decision and obviously at least trying to offer the max contract and see where that goes. But with this, it's tough, right? And it's funny because that's a microcosm of how coaching is evaluated, right? Like, was it the coach's adjustments? Was it the team just kind of stepping up and not wanting to just roll over to a Miami team that they know they're better than? Like, I feel like from what I saw, it looks like they made some solid adjustments. I feel like he had the guys ready to go in games 4 and 5, especially. I felt like the defensive intensity looked a lot better. I feel like the shots we were getting got a little bit better. So I do, but at the same time, it's like this is the guy's future, and we're really just focused on this 1 7-game series. So, I'd love to have him back either way. It seems like now because they forced the Game 7, like I had kind of tossed out the idea on the last podcast that I don't even know if it's possible, but it's like, look, the dude's 34. He was obviously hired into a weird circumstance. Like, is there any way we can just like kind of push him back down to assistant number 2? And because I can't imagine he's got suitors lined up that would like hire him as a head coach right away anyway.
Yeah.
So it's like, look, dude, how about we just keep you around and, you'll be an assistant and you'll be our top assistant and you'll be this and that. But we do want somebody with more experience because his team's ready for a championship. That felt fair to me. Now I don't know if you can do that to the guy because he's like, what, I'm 1 game away from making the finals and now you're going to, take the keys away from me. Like, I don't know if you can do that. I don't want to fire the guy outright. That's all I can say. I think that the bare minimum is what you said. Like, yes, no shit. We need some veterans that have been in some games on the assistants on the assistant level because it wasn't just Missoula. We also got our assistants ravaged by other teams and losing Stoudemire, losing Will Hardy. So I think that's the minimum, and that's probably what we'll end up doing. And I think I'm okay with that, but I'm not excited about it either. I think I'm just kind of like, yeah, he probably saved his job and he probably deserves it. So.
Yeah, I think it could be a real uncomfortable dynamic, though, if he's the assistant coach and, like you said, he's not happy about it, and they bring in somebody else. And then you could even have, like, this civil war in the locker room if things go south for some reason, because some guys could be like, well, we respect him more as a coach than the new guy.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, he rubs me. He's just a weird guy, too, which, I mean, maybe that's more of a me issue that I can't really connect with this guy. But when I think it was after the game that Tatum was terrible against the Sixers, and then he turned it on. I think it might have been Game 6. It was Game 6, and then he had the big fourth quarter. And they asked him in the media, what do you say to when your best player is struggling the way he was? Clearly it's a mental issue. And his answer, he just looks dead at the journalist and goes, I tell him I love him. Come on, dude. That is just so so you actually think he went over to Tatum in the middle of the game and told him I love you, bro? That's a pretty easy answer to say. Just say hey, just keep shooting, your shots can fall. He's just the whole he does jujitsu. He's just a weird guy. In the pickup games before, when he's playing with his buddies, looks like he's hard fouling people. I don't know. I don't even think maybe down the road he's going to be an okay coach. But I just
feel
think
like he has to be right
now. A team that's in kind of a win now mode. I just don't, in a league where you don't need a great coach, you don't want a coach that's going to restrict you from winning. And that's why, I don't want to keep harping on the contract extension, but it's just so annoying they even put themselves in this situation where now they just almost stuck with the guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's all fair. I mean, that's what I said in the last podcast, too. I'm like, the dude's 34. He's clearly, he should have a bright future ahead of him. I in general, trust the decisions that Brad is making in the front office, and he obviously saw something in this guy where obviously he was in a tough situation, but for whatever reason, they gave him the keys immediately, and they offered him an extension, like you said.
And I will say something positive about him. He actually did seem like those the run they went on, where they won 3 in a row, he was using his timeouts a little differently. You could tell whenever Miami went on a run, he was using a timeout. So
yep.
I want to cut him, give him a little bit of benefit of the doubt because he's kind of learning on the job.
Yeah.
But
that
it is what it is. So, but I agree with you. He's going to be back. I think he'll be back next year. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that I have to say that Tatum answer is I miss that, but that is dog shit. That's like one of those things that you just say when you're just like, oh, well, people, the reporters will love this because it shows I care about my guys. But you're absolutely right. There's like he didn't say that maybe after the game or whatever, but yeah, he did not say that in the huddle. So that's funny. That's worth noting, I suppose. But the last point in the Celtics, unless you have anything else here, but like. How disappointing is this season, right? Is this just a disappointing end of the season? Are you disappointed as a whole? Is there a silver lining that you can take away from this season? Because I think if you zoom out and you're like, hey, they did have, again, a rookie head coach. They were one game away from making it to the NBA Finals. They did claw their way back from being down 0-3. They showed some fight. They did something that only 3 other teams in NBA history had even done. So how disappointed are you? That might be a dumb question, but that's what I'm asking. So I want to hear your thoughts on that.
If you told me maybe halfway through the season they were going to lose in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals, I'd probably ask you to who.
Yeah.
I think the path was there for them to go to the NBA Finals. All they had to do was, I know they're not a traditional number 8 seed, but there's still a reason they're an 8 seed. All you had to do is take care of business remotely at home, and you're in the NBA Finals, and whatever happens there happens. I just felt like they, like I said earlier, I think meant like just who I thought they were kind of regressed. They didn't get back to where they were last year, and I never quite felt like they, especially towards the second half of the year, that they really ever had it figured out, and they like were able to string like a bunch of wins together where they seemed like they were gonna like actually be the team that we saw games 4 through 6.
Yep, absolutely. Where I kind of landed on is like, look, because of what I just said in terms of them making it to the, one game away from the finals, you can never really be too upset with that. That's kind of the minimum that I put on the team. I was expecting it to be Milwaukee, right? I was always saying, I'm like, I think the championship runs through a Boston-Milwaukee Eastern Conference Finals. That obviously sounds pretty dumb since Miami took care of both of those teams, but that's where I was at on it. Would you feel better if you lost to Giannis, the best player in the world, or someone in that conversation and a much better team as a whole? Yeah, you probably feel better, but because we do have this context, because we do know, the level of the talent advantage that we had over Miami, I think you are allowed to say that it's a disappointing finish. So, obviously, I think the Celtics have some big decisions ahead. I'm sure, some of the, how you end up when you play this late into the season, right, is that free agency is already right around the corner. So I'm sure we'll be hearing about, Jaylen Brown's contract extension and all that in short order. Exactly, I'm sure Joe Mazzulla will get some sort of job security. We'll have a decision on him either way. So we'll have to discuss that with you here. But anything else in the C's before we preview the NBA Finals here?
No, I think that's pretty much it. But I think we're going to see a lot of the same next year. I think it's going to be as close as it can to the same core with the same coach as we saw this year. And that's another thing I wanted to say is they seem like I didn't like the answer from Mazzulla after the game where they asked him, like, do you think you guys rely on the 3 too much? And his answer was just no. He seems like he's a guy that's a little stubborn with the journalists, but like if you're just going to be so reliant on the 3 ball, like I would like to see in the offseason get someone that's more of like a NBA veteran off the bench. Like clearly they don't trust Hauser because he doesn't get any serious minutes. If you're going to be hucking the ball up from 3 as much as you are, I'd like to see somebody off the bench more that you can trust to shoot the ball.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm not as worried about that just because I think normally Brogdon is that guy. And obviously when you sustain an injury to your arm and again, I'm not trying to play the injury excuse, but I do think normally he's obviously the guy we're looking for because he shoots the ball as a good clip and he just sustained an injury to a shooting arm. It's also disappointing to mention, the shooting drop off from Al Horford. I think I commented on it on the podcast like 3 months ago that he was shooting like 60% from 3. And ever since that episode, his percentages just steeply declined. And he obviously I think he was well below 30% in the playoffs. And he definitely was against Miami. So, yeah, man, I think it's disappointing. The last thing that I wanted to say, I wanted to get your opinion specifically on. Obviously, the last week or so, with each game from game 4 onward, the comparisons of this Celtics team to the 0-4 Red Sox increased with every single win, obviously, as they were in closer. What were your thoughts on the Red Sox comparisons to that 0-4 team and how the media kind of drummed that up over the past week?
I'm not a very superstitious person, but I hated it the entire time because go ahead and make the comparisons when the job's finished. Now when there's still a game 7 left to play, and I texted you yesterday afternoon, I was nervous that fans and you had people all over they're just penciling this in as a win. And I said Miami is not a team that's going to break and give you tonight's game. Yep. And I hated it. then you're crossing sports too, which is fine. But it would have been a cute little story if the Celtics had completed the comeback, but it means nothing because they didn't. So,
yep, absolutely. I wanted to get
Red Sox are one of my favorite. I don't really love baseball anymore, but probably like I love that document, like 30 for 30, whatever it's called, 4 Days of October or something. But no, I mean, that's just the whole fanboy experience, typical.
I had to ask.
Well, actually, one last thing with the fanboys. The thing is, like, right now you see it on Twitter, like, super down on Jalen, super down on the coach. But trust me, 2 months from now, when they sign him to the Supermax and they say they're bringing Mazzulla back, it's going to be the greatest thing ever. So they're going to be on board. It's a fucking cycle with these guys. Just, yeah, whatever. I'm trying to be a better person. I don't need to go on a freaking tangent about the fanboys.
I get it. I'm out here in Dallas, surrounded by Cowboys fans, and so we are smack dab in the middle of this is our year for the Cowboys fans. This is our year season for them. So I understand it. I understand your frustration, but we will see, man. We will see how this offseason plays out for the Celtics. Obviously, a disappointing finish last night. But let's recap, let's preview rather the NBA Finals, right? We still have one more series left to play. We have the 1 seed in the Western Conference that has been chilling, that has been on ice for over a week now. The Denver Nuggets are now facing the Miami Heat at home in Denver. And yeah, man, what is your gut when I tell you Nuggets Heat? How do you feel about it? Are you excited to watch? Are you exhausted just with how the Celtics season ended? How are you feeling about the finals coming up?
For starters, I feel like I haven't seen the Nuggets play in 2 months. That's how long this little too, Celtics Heat comeback felt. I want to go in optimistic, but I have a feeling that the Nuggets are just going to run them over and we're going to get a shitty NBA Finals. I hope, even if that's the thing though, like if the Nuggets run them over, but can Miami at least keep these games competitive to keep the games entertaining? But I just wonder if Denver is just going to be too much for them. But I do want to see, because we talk about, Jimmy Butler, playoff Jimmy, how far can that really take them? Like, if he actually makes this a competitive series, that's insane. Because I think that this is such a huge mismatch for them. I don't know if they're going to get Tyler Hero back, because I saw him putting up some shots in the last, I think it might have been before Game 6 or Game 7. But as a guy that likes to bet on games and does a lot of prop bets, I'm very fearful going into this series that we're going to see stars getting pulled with the last 3 or 4 minutes left and seeing a lot of unders because I'm an over guy. But yeah, I'm hopeful, but not feeling great about this one.
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting, right? Obviously, I feel like I'm almost not allowed to comment on it. I'm going to jump ahead. I'm going to pick the Nuggets to win this series. I think most people are. I think that is part of the thing that, not to say that it gives me solace in the fact that the Celtics just lost, but I do think Denver was the best of these 3 remaining teams, and I don't think it was particularly close. I think the Celtics would have a tough time with this Denver team. Obviously, before the series, I would have picked, Boston over Denver was my finals pick, but, the playoffs is where you really learn about these teams, and Denver has been far and away the best team in the playoffs. They've been undefeated at home, and in addition to the fact that, I obviously think Denver is a more talented team than Miami. From a basketball perspective, from what I can evaluate and from what I can analyze, it's a horrible matchup for them too, right? Just the brief history of this matchup for the Heat is that Jokic is 10-1 versus the Heat in the last 4 years. That's unbelievable. I think that, Miami obviously thrives with their zone defense. They play more zone than any other team, and it's not even close. I think that if there's any team that I have confidence is going to annihilate that zone, it's going to be Denver. You have the best passer in the entire league who also happens to be 7 feet and he can see every single passing lane. And then you take into the account that I feel a lot better about Denver's guys knocking down their shots than I did about our guys at that point in the series. That being said, Spoelstra is a really good coach. I don't think that they play as much zone because I think Denver's just going to play him out of it. I'd be actually pretty shocked if they still have that as a really consistent part of their defense. But at the same time, I don't know if I'm allowed to comment because I've picked against Miami all 3 rounds. I didn't even pick them against the goddamn Knicks because I'm a moron, I guess.
Well, that's why I also don't want to doubt them and what I just said because I'm we've been doubting them all postseason. Are they going to defend home court and are we going to see this go 6 or 7? But I mean, Jokic, I would love to know the history of NBA Finals MVP odds going in, but Jokic is a heavy favorite to win the MVP. He's almost a 4-1 favorite just to win the Finals MVP. So I think clearly odds makers are expecting just a dominant performance for him. But I just wonder, even if with the great coach, like, they clearly they say all the right things in the locker room, they know how to get the guys going. I just think like Denver could just still be too much. Like if they're also a good coach team where they're just, and I think you saw it in the Lakers series, they could have easily given up one of those games in LA, but clearly Coach Malone's got them like, we got our foot on their throat right now. Like we're not going to give them any room to breathe. So that's why I would not be surprised if we see really like some competitive games, but like just Denver steps on their throat at the end of all these games. I don't know how far you have the series going. I think it's going to be, I wanted to say Denver sweep. I got Denver in 5.
That's what I landed on. Out of respect for Jimmy Butler, I think he'll have one of those games where he just kind of takes over and just kind of wills them to win. I think if, let me just start by, playing devil's advocate here and kind of painting the picture from Miami. I think that Jimmy really has to be the guy that we saw against Milwaukee more so than what we saw against Boston. Not to say that he was bad. I think you'd probably still make the argument he was the best player on the court, but Boston has a lot of guys to throw at Jimmy, right? I think Tatum did a fantastic job defensively most of the time, but having other athletes on him. Obviously, Jimmy thrives against, smaller defenders because he really put Derek White in the blender for the first couple games of the series. White was better defensively in the series later on. But, Denver doesn't really have, I don't really know, like, the one-on-one matchup of who's guarding Jimmy Butler. Like, it felt like KCP might be the guy early on, but Jimmy's a lot bigger than KCP, and I just think if he was able to score on Derek White, he's going to take KCP to pound town. Like maybe it's Aaron Gordon, I don't know. So I do think it's kind of a tough matchup defensively for the Nuggets, but I think that their game plan is going to ultimately be outscoring them. So I do think that there's a path. And again, Caleb Barton, if he plays like that again, like he averaged 19 points a game that series. He outplayed Jaylen Brown significantly, and his shooting splits were unbelievable. He was shooting the ball like 50% from 3. So that's
a part of my Miami doubt. It's like, can these guys that were hitting all these shots in the series against the Celtics, can they continue to hit? Like I don't think it's crazy to say that. I don't expect them to keep playing this well. And I'm curious, like, what do you think Miami's going to do to try and stop Jokic? Do you think like they're just going to put Bam on him? Do you think they're going to like try and like sprinkle another guy on him and like double him up? I'm not to put you on the spot, but I just don't see how like, and Bam, I don't think Bam Adebayo is a bad player, and I think he's a good defender, but he's just a guy that like some nights just doesn't seem like he's going to have much of a role on offense or really in the game. I mean, maybe you know more about him, but there were some games where I'm like, this guy, he doesn't actually stink, but I'm like, this guy is just doing nothing out there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big Bam guy either. I think he reminds me of a little bit of Anthony Davis in that, look, no matter how bad Anthony Davis was on offense, like he was so hit or miss, right? He was literally every other game he was incredible, and every other game he was trash on offense. But he always brings it on defense, and that's what I feel like Bam is going to do. That being said, he's a very different type of defender than Anthony Davis. I think Anthony Davis is, at this point in his career, just such an elite rim protector. Bam's only 6'9". He's obviously, he can block shots, but he's not going to like totally make his presence felt around the rim, especially if he's playing up against a guy like Jokic. So initially I was thinking like maybe I don't know who you throw on him as like the main primary defender. If you give a guy like Kevin Love more minutes just to be like the big body and stick him on Jokic and then have Bam be the help guy. But that's not really the best way to maximize what Bam does. So I would expect to see my gut when Miami does go man, I would expect to see Bam on him and just try to take away Jokic's passing lanes as good as possible. I think I share similar frustrations with you about Bam. He is a really good passer, but I think his individual offensive game is just so hit or miss. I think I lean toward the side where I'm usually not as impressed with what he can do offensively. Like there was a couple games where when Miami was losing, like I think Game 6 especially, I think he missed like 10 post hooks. Like they just were not falling for him. Yeah. And I'm like, what else does this guy have in his bag, right? I don't think the offense is going to really come from him. But I think ultimately, look, I'm not going to doubt Miami in saying like, I think that they can score at the same rate that they scored against Boston. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Like, let's just assume, again, they keep their insane three-point shooting up. Again, their three-point shooting percentages jumped like 10% in the playoffs. It's like unheard of. Let's say they keep that up. I still think they end up losing the series because I don't think that they can score as much as Denver. Denver is going to have so much of an easier time scoring on Miami than Boston did. And another reason is like, look, man, even if they find a way to sell out on Jokic, I think it's still going to be a really big Jamal Murray series. Like,
I was just going to say that. Like, even if they stop Jokic, if Murray plays like he did in those games against the Lakers, they're going to get swept. And then if you throw in Michael Porter, if Michael Porter is hitting his shots, then and maybe you could say if you're a Miami fan that like, hey, maybe they're not going to get that out of Michael Porter. Maybe Murray is, because has had a couple bad games this postseason. Maybe we can expect that and steal a game or two. But the way, and that's the other thing too, these first couple games, you're going to have a team that's been sitting. It's like rust versus like almost like you've been playing, 7-game gritty series. I don't know. It's going to be an interesting dynamic to see who's going to come out on top with a team that could be. Yeah, exactly. Because Denver hasn't played in what, 2 weeks? Will it have been like 2 weeks when they tip off? Because they tip off Thursday night, I believe. Then you have a Miami team that's like just coming off a 7-game series.
Yeah, I think that's worth noting as well. Just on the Jamal Murray point, the reason I brought him up was just because I feel like low-key, Miami doesn't really have a ton of guys to throw at like a smaller guard like that. I feel like they kind of struggled to guard, like you said, Derek White at times. I know that was more against the zone, but I just feel like with Murray's perimeter shooting, and again, if he's obviously shooting the way he did against the Lakers, it's wraps. So I just think that is low-key might even be a tougher matchup for them to guard individually than Jokic is, just with how good Murray was playing. But yeah, that's another dynamic as well, right? Denver's obviously been resting for, like you said, 2 weeks. Miami has literally the shortest amount of time possible heading into an NBA final, like the minimum amount of rest, especially when you consider they were in Boston for Game 7, and now they literally are going straight to Denver, to get ready for Game 1 on Thursday. So, just a couple days off. Like, obviously Miami's calling card is they just punch you in the mouth, and they've stolen Game 1 of every single series on the road, which is insane to think about. Obviously it makes sense when you consider they won all those series, but I don't know, man. I still think Denver ends up taking care of business, and I think that, whether Miami steals, game, I don't think they're going to steal Game 1 in Denver. I don't think that's going to happen. I could see them maybe stealing Game 2 or maybe stealing 3 or 4 in Miami, but I really do think it's going to be Heat in 5, man. I just think it's a really tough basketball matchup for what the Heat want to do, and they're really going to have to. Spoelstra's going to be put to the test, and they're going to have to really change what they do defensively, because it's night and day compared to how they handle this Boston team.
Yeah, and by no means do I think Miami's going to roll over for them, because that's not who they are. I just think there's just matchups where it's just too much, and the one team is way more talented than the other. But I mean, how many times have I said that now about Miami this playoff run? So who knows? You never know what can happen. Denver still, they haven't won a championship before. Maybe they'll kind of choke. It's possible it could happen, and it could make for a competitive series, but I'm not counting on it.
Yeah. And I do want to just give Miami credit too. Like I'm really not approaching this with the perspective of like a sour Boston fan. I just genuinely, I'm really impressed with Miami. I actually kind of like them, as fucked up as that sounds, given they just beat our team. But like, they have Jimmy Butler's a dog. I love Jimmy Butler. I love Coach Spo. He's got a great story. Like, he just takes these guys, like, with the absence of Kyle Lowry. That guy's a bona fide scrub, and he can go to hell. But beyond Kyle Lowry, I like everybody on that Heat roster. Like, they play the game the right way. It's hard to not root for a guy in Caleb Martin that was, like, literally almost out of the league, like, 18 months ago. Like, it's unbelievable what they're able to do. And so I have a lot of respect for that Miami team. I think that it's improbable as a finals run as I can remember. I think you'd have to go back like many, many years to get to that point. Like, I'm just trying to think of teams that made it to the finals and like obviously didn't end up winning the whole thing, because I don't think Miami's going to win the whole thing, obviously. But like I don't know, how far do you have to even go back to get to a team that's improbable? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but
I don't even. Because, I don't think an 8 seed has ever made it. And I know they're not a traditional 8 seed, but you still don't see a lot of times these, like, real teams that are lower seeds go on, like, runs like this.
Yeah.
And, like, I even found myself a little bit in this series. Like, I obviously want the Celtics to win, but it'd be kind of cool to see Butler go to the finals and pull this out of his ass and carry this team to the NBA finals. But, no, I don't know.
Yeah. I think the only team that I could even really think of that surprised me, just kind of, I'm literally doing this off the top of my head, I was thinking of like that 2010 Magic team, because that was the year where, or not 2010, sorry, the 2009 Magic team, because that was the year where KG got hurt. So I think we
beat the Celtics.
Yep. And so, and then they ended up beating the Cavs in the Eastern Conference Finals, which was pretty surprising. And then you think, man, Dwight Howard's been to a finals as like the best player on that team, like that, obviously. And then the Lakers just ended up rolling through them.
I believe that's a series where Glenn Davis got hit so hard in the face by Dwight Howard that he got up, and Doc Rivers is screaming at him to get back on defense. And Glenn Davis gets up to try and run back on defense, and he literally looks like a newborn deer, and he cannot run back on defense. And luckily that old ref, who I don't even know if he's still with us anymore, I think he might be the one that kissed Barkley that time, or he's one of the older guys, realized that this guy clearly is concussed and caught him. But Yeah, I do. I actually remember that series. No, I'm not going to say vividly because we were very young, but that was a good stretch for the Celtics. It's been about 15 years. Well, let's not to circle back to the Celtics, but it's like, when is making 8-9 playoffs in a row? When is that just not enough? Like they've won one championship in 40 years almost now. Like,
Yeah.
at some point you gotta just. I don't know if you want to make a deal that like shortens your long-term window but opens it up more in the short term. I don't know.
I mean, I'm at that point, right? I think like that's what we were saying before. It's like, look, man, I don't think I'm greedy, but I think that the ceiling of this team has been raised to the point where we're not underdogs. We're not this scrappy, like, oh, Tatum and Brown, they're still 22. It's like, look, bro, Brown's like what, 26 going on 27, and Tatum's 25 going on 26. Like, these guys have
if
been
not now, when? If not now,
yeah,
when? Like,
and they've been
you can't just keep like.
They've been in more playoff games than almost any other duo in the entire NBA. They probably have the most of like active duos, certainly. Like, they've been in a lot of games, and the rest of the team isn't really. We don't have any real young guys around them. It was the absence of Grant and Pritchard, I suppose, that are like our 8th and 9th guy. Like, we have a team of veterans, and so I think it is reasonable for us to expect to contend for championships, the level of talent that we have, and it's just a question of if, hey, is this the right coach for the job, and is this core of Tatum and Brown going to be the ones that can ultimately, get us over that hump? I think I still have some optimism that it is, but it's going to be hard to imagine a better situation than what they had a better situation than what they experienced this year, because going through an 8 seed in the Eastern Conference Finals, having home court the rest of the way they would have had home court against Denver too, that's a lot to walk away from. So I think it's certainly a disappointment. But all right, man. Well, I think that basically covers it for us. RJ and I both have Nuggets in 5. It was obviously a disappointing end of the season for the Celtics, but of course, thank you to RJ for your time. RJ, thanks for coming.
Of course, whenever you need me.
Of course. And so with that, before I let you guys go, got to, of course, tell you to rate and review the show. Follow at Words with Wallace on everything, on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcast. Be sure to share the show, tell a friend. We'll definitely have RJ on at some point in the offseason here just to kind of talk about the C's. Once we get word on Jaylen Brown, perhaps once we get word on the coaching situation for next year, we will definitely bring RJ back on. But that's going to do it for me, guys. I will talk to you next week. Peace.